My name is Andreana Pettersen, and this is an overview of the Myers Briggs Type Indicator, a personality assessment. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a professional career counselor. I have a Master of Science in Counseling and Student Affairs. The majority of my professional experience has been within career development within the university setting, but I also have experience in personal counseling and human resources. Within this presentation, we're going to talk about the different types, cognitive functions, compatibility, and maybe you can learn a little bit about yourself and how you might want to apply this to your life. So, what is the Myers Briggs Type Indicator, also known as the MBTI? It's a personality assessment based on Jung's theory of psychological types, and it was created as a translation by a mother and daughter duo, Catherine Briggs and Isabella Briggs Myers, back in the 1940s. This assessment has a lot of different applications. It can be used in business, for job placement, in education when finding an area of study, and it can be used in personal relationships, whether that be a romantic relationship, a relationship between a parent and a child, or just friendships. It is also reliable across cultures and test rate reliable, meaning that you should be able to take this assessment and within a week or two later, a month later, take it again and you should have the same results. Within the MBTI, there are 16 different typologies, and I just want to focus in on the word typology. Typology means that you're going to fit into some kind of category. Now, it does seem kind of strange given how vastly unique we all are. We bring our own person and our own unique experience to the table. It does seem kind of strange that we will all fit into 16 different boxes. But when you look through your type and you're reading through it, don't expect to be this person to a T. But I'm sure you'll probably find some commonalities. Then there's the idea of nature-nurture, fixed or flexible. The question is, am I born this way, or is this something that can change over time? There's been a lot of research into this topic, and the consensus is it's kind of a combination of both. You are born with a personality, and that does develop very early on in your childhood. But as you grow, as you develop, have different experiences, it can change over time. But it's usually not a drastic change. It's usually just a slight change. So there has been a lot of research into the MBTI, and I mean a lot. A lot of supporting evidence and a lot of critics. Some people to go as far as to say that this is a fad. But please know that this is evidence-based, this is theory-based application, and it has been used for a very long time in a number of different ways around the world. At this time, I might recommend you stopping this video, going online, and taking this assessment. That way when you come back and you're looking, it kind of makes a little more sense to you. So some websites I would recommend would be Human Metrics and also the 16 personalities. I like the 16 personalities because it gives you tendencies. Do you have a slight tendency towards one or the other? Do you have a moderate tendency or do you have a strong tendency? I like Human Metrics because it is a very reliable site as well. There are tons of different websites out there on internet land for the MBTI, and just know some are better than others. If you want to take the official MBTI, you can also go to your college career center if you are a current student or an alumni and you have access to those resources. So hopefully you've taken the assessment and you've found what your type is. And you probably noticed that they tend to label it with some kind of characteristic that just describes the type in an overall nutshell. So for an example, the INFJ is considered the advocate, the ESFJ is the consul, the ISTP is the virtuoso, etc. And you probably see that there are different types of initials within these types. We call those dichotomies. So there are 4 different dichotomies or opposites. You're going to be either one or the other. You could be extroverted or introverted. You could be sensing or intuitive. You could be thinking or feeling or perceiving or judging. And if you've taken the 16 personalities, they'll tell you what kind of tendency do you have for one or the other. Do you have a slight tendency, a moderate tendency, or a strong tendency? So the first dichotomy which we're going to discuss is represented as an I or E, introverted or extroverted. And I think this is probably the most recognizable dichotomy out of all of them, because people kind of have a feeling whether they're more of an introvert or more of an extrovert. I think our society places a lot of emphasis on being an extroverted person, but just know that one is not bad and one is not good. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. Also know that being an introvert, it does not mean you're antisocial. That is not what it means at all. And know that this, again, is a spectrum. It's what you have a tendency towards. Someone is not completely introverted. Someone is not completely extroverted. A lot of this actually fall in between the middle. Some people might describe that as being ambiverted, being able to bounce between one or the other. So whether you're introverted or extroverted has a lot to do with how you process information. Do you do it internally, whereas someone might seem like they're very quiet, maybe not a whole lot going on, but in their mind they are processing a mile a minute? Or an extrovert, on the other hand, if they really need to go over some information, they might go and talk to someone, or maybe even talk to themselves. That is kind of a symptom or a characteristic of someone who is more extroverted, is sometimes they talk to themselves. It's also about how you recharge. So people who are more introverted, at the end of the week on a Friday, they might be more inclined to stay at home, watch a show, read a book, do quiet things that might recharge their battery. Extroverts, on the other hand, are energized by people. So they might be more likely to go out, socialize with friends, go to a party, and that is what actually recharges their battery. So, characteristics of an introvert. They're usually very reserved and reflective, and they have a low tolerance for external stimuli. A lot of introverts enjoy social events. They enjoy going out, but there is a tolerance to where they might start to feel a little overwhelmed, a little drained, and they need to retreat and regain their battery. What are the characteristics of an extrovert? They're very outgoing, they're very energetic, and they do have a greater tolerance for external stimuli. So, is there compatibility between the two? And the answer is potentially. A lot of the times, introverts and extroverts actually go well together because they balance each other out. When an extrovert might need to be brought back down to earth a little bit, that can be helpful. When an introvert needs to be brought out of their shell or is in a social situation with an extrovert, sometimes that extrovert can relieve the pressure off of the introvert in that situation. So there is a room for compatibility. So the next dichotomy is represented by an S or an N, sensing or intuitive. And this is probably a little less recognizable than introverted extroverted. So whether you're sensing or intuitive has a lot to do with how you receive information from the world around you. Do you receive your information through your five senses, what you taste, what you touch, what you hear, see, feel? Or do you look at the big picture? Are you paying attention to everything around you simultaneously and looking for patterns and concepts? So characteristics of a sensor. Sensors live very intensely in the real world, in the physical world. They pay attention to facts and realities. They look at tasks realistically. They pay attention to details. And they place their trust in real world experience versus concepts and theories. They're very practical, and often when they speak very concretely and factual. They're also very present focused, so these types of people will live very intensely in the present moment. On the other hand, intuitives, these people are able to read between the lines, and when they're in a healthy place, they can be pretty good at doing this. They're great at seeing possibilities versus looking at things realistically, and they see the big picture first and then the details that form that big picture. They're usually very conceptual and theoretical, deep and imaginative, and often they might speak in metaphors or analogies. They're also very future-minded, as they're always looking for possibilities around them. So just to make sensing and intuition a little more concrete with you, because I think introversion and extroversion, that's an easy one to get, but maybe sensing and intuition might be a little harder to understand. So what I want you to do is just take a look at this picture. Now, when you looked at this picture, what did you notice? How did you take in this information? Did you look at the colors first? Did you look at the shapes and the objects in the picture? Or were you more paying attention to the people and how they're interacting and what they might be experiencing and feeling in that moment? So if your first approach was to look at the shapes and the colors and the items, you might be more of a sensor. If you were more looking at the interaction and the overall big picture, then you're probably more of an intuitive. The next dichotomy is either T or F. You're either thinking or feeling. And again, this is a spectrum. You have a tendency for one or the other. And just because you're a thinking person doesn't mean you don't have feelings. And just because you are a feeling person doesn't mean that you are without logic or reasoning. One is not better than the other, but if you have a tendency for one or the other, then that means that one is your go-to where the other might be a little bit of a weakness. And this revolves about how we make decisions. Do you make decisions based on facts or logic, your thoughts, or do you pay greater consideration to your feelings? So characteristics of people who are more thinking, they tend to gravitate towards technical or scientific fields or even areas of research. They often problem solve using logic. They tend to make decisions using their head. And in communication, they're very logical, but that can come off as being very blunt, which can be helpful, but can be unhelpful when you need to consider other people's feelings and communicate more of a sensitive manner. And because of that, they might come off as being uncaring, unfeeling, or indifferent. On the other hand, people who are feeling, they tend to gravitate towards helping fields like teaching, social work, counseling. They also problem solve, but they often problem solve to restore harmony. They can be said to make decisions with their heart, and they're very empathic, and they often cushion their communication, thinking about other people's feelings and taking that into consideration when they need to communicate, which can be helpful and can be unhelpful. In some cases, they may come off as being insincere or indirect, too mushy, or even too idealistic. Now, there is room for compatibility between the two. Thinking and feelers go together pretty well? And the answer is potentially. Sometimes thinkers can appreciate the warmth of the person who is more feeling. On the other hand, a person who is more feeling can really appreciate someone who can provide some logic and more reasoning and look at a different perspective. So they can appreciate one or the other, and there can also be room for conflict. In a way, one is the strength and the other one's their weakness, and they kind of fill the gap between the two. So our last dichotomy is represented by the P or the J, and that stands for perceiving or judging. A lot of people assume that judging means that you're judgmental, but that is not the case at all. This describes how we tend to live our everyday lives, things day to day. So do you like to plan ahead and stay organized, or do you like to have things open to where you're more spontaneous and flexible? Think about if you were to go on vacation. Do you have your entire itinerary planned ahead to where you know exactly what activities you're going to do on the day you're going to do them, on the time you want to do them, to make sure that you're organized and you fit as much as you can within your vacation? Or are you a person that likes to be a little more spontaneous? You might have, an idea or two of what you would like to do on vacation, but you don't really have anything concrete in mind. So characteristics of people who are more judging, they like to make to-do lists, they schedule things in advance, they enjoy organization, and sometimes maybe disorganization might affect them a little bit. They're often on time, deadlines are usually not very flexible, they consider those absolute. They like neat and orderly environments. They tend to be decisive. So when you think of judging, think of the word decisive. They can make decisions quickly, which in some cases can be helpful when a decision needs to be made and you can't be wishy-washy. But sometimes you need to consider all perspectives, everything around you, and then take your time in making a decision. So it does have its strengths and weaknesses. They also work with steady energy, and they kind of live by the motto, I need to work first and play last. Once all my work is done, then I can enjoy my free time. So characteristics of people who are more perceiving. They like to stay open to whatever happens. They keep plans to a minimum. They often work last minute to meet deadlines. So these are the people in college that maybe were cramming last minute for a test, or maybe see their deadline coming up and approaching, and then that's when they start to work. They're also often fashionably late. Their space can be neat or could be cluttered. And often when they make a decision, they like to take a step back, they ponder it, they think about all angles, and then they proceed, which can be helpful, but again, unhelpful if a decision needs to be made in a timely manner. They tend to work in bursts of energy. When something finds their attention, they jump on it. And they believe that life is a mixture of play and work. So these people will often kind of mix the both. So within the 4 different dichotomies, there are actually 8 different cognitive functions. I'm going to graze over this concept just briefly, give you an introduction to it, and if you'd like, you can do your own research on your own because it truly is very in-depth. So the 8 cognitive functions include introverted or extroverted feeling, introverted or extroverted intuition, introverted or extroverted thinking, and introverted or extroverted sensing. So if you look at the chart, you can see that there is a breakdown. For an example, the ISFP, the dominant function is introverted feeling, the auxiliary is extroverted sensing, the tertiary is introverted intuition, and the inferior is extroverted thinking. Going back to Jung's theory, it's known that the dominant or primary function is actually a very large part of who you are. Up to about 75% of who you are is controlled by your dominant function. About 15% is your next go-to, your auxiliary function. And those two functions are developed fairly early in life. Your tertiary and your inferior functions are developed later in life. And it's kind of known as maybe your subconscious or your weakest area. And how you act when you're under stress or when you are healthy will definitely come out to play if you're able to only tap into certain functions. I would like to do a quick comparison. So if you look at, for example, the ENTP and the INTP, if you notice, both their dominant and auxiliary and tertiary and inferior functions are actually flip-flopped. So even though that person, those two people are just one dichotomy apart, one's introverted, one's extroverted, because of their cognitive functions, they're actually going to send and receive information very differently. They are going to be very different people. So whether you are stressed or well-balanced, that has a great effect on your cognitive functions. So let's take the ENFP for an example. If you are well-balanced, you're happy, you're healthy, you're not very stressed out, what would that look like? Well, your dominant function is going to be still your go-to. So for that person, the ENFP, your intuition is going to be working well, it's going to be pretty accurate. Your auxiliary function, your feeling, you're going to be able to tap into that pretty well. You're going to understand your feelings. And then even your tertiary and your inferior function, you'll still be able to tap into that too, but to a much lesser degree. So you'll still have logic and reasoning and an understanding of the physical world and what's going on around you. Now, if you're under a little bit of stress, what does that look like? Well, for that person, the ENFP, they're going to be reliant very much on their dominant function, their intuition. They're going to be less able to tap into their feelings. They're going to have a lesser understanding of their inside feelings. They're also going to be less able to tap into their thinking and their sensing functions. Now, let's say they are under a great deal of stress, prolonged stress, what we call grip stress. How does that play out? Well, what happens is they are unable to tap into their dominant, auxiliary, and tertiary functions very easily. And what becomes the big old beast is their sensing. So if this person, the ENFP, is under grip stress, they're going to retreat very much into the physical world. Another example, let's take the ISTP. These people are known for being very easygoing, very tolerable, not very reactive. So when they are under grip stress, prolonged stress, that person that is normally very emotionally even keel or maybe even under emotional or come off as being unemotional will all of a sudden be very emotional and reactive and even irrational with their emotions. So another topic I'd like to get into briefly is the idea of compatibility between the different types. As you can see, there's a chart listed below, and it describes what types might be more ideal or good matches, and which types might be more challenging or maybe a little more incompatible. Like I've said, every person is their own unique individual, so just because on paper you're listed as a good match with another person, it doesn't mean that's always going to work out. And just because you're listed as an incompatible or less than ideal match on paper, it doesn't mean it can't work. So don't let the MBTI rule your life or exclude you from getting involved with certain people. Just know that it can work with a little bit of communication and compromise. If two people care about it, they can make it work. What's really interesting about when two types that are incompatible get together, it could be challenging, it could be a little bit of work, but there's also a lot of room for personal growth because essentially that person's strengths are your weaknesses and your weaknesses are their strengths. So there is a lot of opportunity to grow. But according to theory, if you find someone who's more of a compatible type for you, you're more likely to find that relationship to be a little more natural, a little more easy. So maybe keep that in mind. If you're having troubles with someone, communication issues with someone, maybe think about how they might have a different approach to sending or receiving information, to recharging, to making decisions. So that includes my presentation and overview of the MBTI. I hope you find it helpful and maybe a tool that you can use when interacting with others, or in the very least, just have a better understanding of yourself. There are some other helpful assessments that I would like to recommend. One is the Enneagram, and that goes and ties in very well with the MBTI. Another assessment which I really recommend is the 5 languages of love, and I've included the website below to direct you there. The 5 languages of love describe how do we show love to others and how do we recognize the love that others give to us, whether that be words of affirmation, acts of service, gifts, quality time, or physical touch. And this can be applied to all types of relationships. Again, friendships, romantic relationships, and relationships between parent and child or even siblings. So knowing your language is really important, and it's helpful to know how others may express their love for you. When it comes to personality types, there are some commonalities between the languages of love and personality types. That's not always the case. They won't always be the same, but there is some tendencies. So that concludes this presentation. I hope you've learned a little bit about yourself, and and how you might be able to apply that in your life. I wish you well and take care.